He had always loved living in this quiet neighborhood. It was one of those places where the streets were clean, the houses were well kept, and the neighbors smiled politely as they walked their dogs. Everything seemed perfect on the surface, but underneath, the neighborhood had rules. Strict rules, and a group of people who took it upon themselves to enforce them. They called themselves the Homeowners Association, or HOA, and they had a reputation for being very serious about their authority. He had bought his property years ago, drawn to it not just because of the house, but because of the small lake that stretched across the back. It wasn't huge, but it was beautiful, peaceful, and private. On many evenings, he would sit by the water's edge, watch the reflection of the sunset ripple across the surface, and forget about the rest of the world. To him, that lake was freedom, a slice of calm in a world that often felt rushed and chaotic. For a long time, everything had been fine. He followed the HOA rules as best as anyone could, even though he didn't always agree with all of them. The HOA had rules about how tall the grass could be, what colors houses could be painted, and even what kind of plants could grow in the yard. At first, he had found it annoying, but over time, he had gotten used to it. As long as he kept his lawn neat and didn't draw too much attention to himself, he was free to enjoy his home. The trouble began one morning when he noticed a letter stuck under his door. The HOA had sent it. He tore it open and read it quickly. They were complaining about the lake. According to the letter, the water might be unsafe, they said, and it could attract unwanted attention or even legal trouble. They were asking him to take immediate action to fix the lake, which didn't make sense. The lake was natural, clear, and calm. There was nothing dangerous about it. He had lived there for years without a single problem. The next morning, the homeowner woke to the gentle sound of birds chirping and the soft ripple of the lake against its banks. Life had settled into a peaceful rhythm, but he understood that calm moments were also opportunities to reflect, prepare, and appreciate the balance he had achieved. The past weeks had taught him that influence and respect were earned through patience, clarity, and quiet confidence, not by confrontation or force. He started the day with a walk around the property, taking note of the small details that often went unnoticed. The garden was thriving, flowers blooming in bright colors, and the lake's surface mirrored the blue sky perfectly. This attention to detail was a part of his approach to life, reminding him that maintaining a calm and orderly environment contributed to clear thinking and effective decision-making. Every step he took was deliberate, every observation meaningful. After breakfast, he sat by the window with a notebook, jotting down thoughts about the recent events with the HOA. He reflected on the journey from the initial letters and threats to the final calm and understanding that had been established. It was fascinating to see how simple patience and preparation could change the dynamics of power. By remaining composed and presenting facts clearly, he had shifted the perspective of those who had initially assumed authority over him. During the morning, a few neighbors stopped by, curious about the lake and the homeowner's recent experiences. He welcomed them warmly, sharing stories about the lake's maintenance, the wildlife that thrived there, and the small joys of living in a peaceful neighborhood. His tone was natural and unassuming, and he noticed how people responded positively to calm, thoughtful communication. It reinforced the lesson that true influence often comes from respect and clarity rather than intimidation. By midday, he decided to review some of the HOA's past decisions and budgets, not out of concern, but to stay informed. Knowledge had been a crucial part of the calm authority he had established. Understanding how the HOA operated, what their priorities were, how they depended on homeowner support had allowed him to navigate the conflict effectively. It reminded him that awareness and preparation were key tools in any situation where power dynamics were at. Played as the afternoon sun warmed the property. He took a long walk along the edge of the lake, letting the water's reflection and the gentle breeze help him think. The lake had become more than a property feature. It was a symbol of his strategy, patience, and quiet influence. Each ripple in the water reminded him of the subtle impact of calm and reason in shaping outcomes, even when faced with opposition or intimidation. During his walk, he noticed a small group of birds building nests along the bank. He paused to watch them, reflecting on how life continued naturally, even in the presence of challenges. This observation brought a sense of peace and continuity. The lake was thriving, the environment was balanced, and the lessons he had learned were clear: patience, preparation, and calm action were often more effective than confrontation. In the early evening, he received a brief visit from one of the HOA board members. The tone was polite, respectful, and notably different from the aggressive approach of the past. The board member asked questions about the lake's maintenance and expressed appreciation for the homeowner's transparency. The interaction was short but meaningful. It highlighted how respect and calm authority could influence others, even those who had initially sought to assert control, after the visitor left. He reflected on the subtle changes in the neighborhood dynamic. The HOA's approach had shifted, not because they were forced to change, but because they recognized the homeowner's clarity and preparedness. This quiet shift in behavior was more powerful than any argument or confrontation. Influence, he realized, often came not from domination, but from consistent, thoughtful action. As night fell, he sat by the lake, watching the stars reflected in the water. The ripples created a gentle dance of light and movement. It was a reminder that life, even after conflict, could remain beautiful and balanced. The homeowner understood that calmness, patience, and thoughtful preparation were not just strategies for conflict, but principles for living well. The lake, serene and undisturbed, symbolized the strength that comes from steady, intentional action. In these quiet moments, he appreciated the lessons learned, the importance of preparation, the value of patience, and the subtle power of clear, calm communication. The neighborhood had returned to its natural rhythm. The HOA had tempered its approach, and the homeowner had maintained control over his space without losing integrity or composure. The lake was a testament to this journey, reflecting not only the sky above, but the homeowner's ability to navigate challenges thoughtfully and effectively. Part 7 concludes. With a sense of reflection and continued balance, the challenges had been met with clarity and patience, and the neighborhood, while returning to normal, carried the subtle lessons of respect and understanding. The homeowner's quiet influence and thoughtful approach ensured that peace was maintained, and that the lake remained a symbol of calm, strength, and resilience. He knew that these principles would guide him in future challenges, reinforcing the value of patience, preparation, and the quiet power of reason. He leaned back in his chair and chuckled. This was not the first time the HOA had tried to assert control over something that didn't need it, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. They were the kind of people who thrived on rules, who felt powerful when they could tell someone else what to do. But they didn't know the one thing that gave him quiet confidence. He had a position of influence that even they couldn't ignore. Over the next few days, the letters kept coming. Each one was more urgent than the last, warning of fines or legal action if he didn't comply. It seemed almost comical to him. They clearly thought they were in charge, that they could push him around like they had done with other homeowners who didn't know better. He decided to handle it carefully, knowing that reacting too quickly might give them the upper hand. While the HOA prepared their complaints, he continued with his life, pretending not to notice the increasing tension. He mowed his lawn, tended his garden, and spent quiet evenings by the lake. From the outside, it looked like everything was normal. From the inside, he was preparing for a situation he had already anticipated. Patience, he reminded himself, was the key. It wasn't just patience he had on his side. He had spent years observing how the HOA operated. They relied heavily on funding from homeowners, and he had a larger financial contribution than anyone else. Without it, many of their plans, projects, and even salaries would be in jeopardy. The HOA thought they had control, but in reality, they depended on people like him to keep running. This knowledge gave him a strange sort of calm, a feeling that he could navigate this storm with subtlety and without conflict. One morning, he received another letter, but this one was different. It had been sent not just by the HOA, but also copied to the local police department. The HOA claimed that the lake posed a danger to the community and they wanted law enforcement to step in. Reading the words made him smile quietly to himself. They really thought calling the police would intimidate him. They didn't realize that the situation was completely under his control. That evening, he went outside to the lake. The water glistened in the fading sunlight, calm and undisturbed. He tossed a small pebble into the water, watching the ripples spread outward. It was symbolic in a way, he thought. Like the pebble, he would let the situation expand naturally and see where it would lead. Acting hastily would only make the HOA more confident. By staying calm, he could turn their aggression into hesitation. Neighbors walked by, glancing at the lake and nodding politely. They didn't know the tension building behind the scenes. To them, it was just a beautiful water feature in the middle of a peaceful neighborhood. But to the HOA, it was a challenge to their authority. He knew that soon someone would arrive to enforce the rules, perhaps even officers from the police department. Yet he remained relaxed, prepared for whatever might come, because he understood the real dynamics of power in this situation. He spent that night planning. He reviewed the HOA's bylaws, financial statements, and meeting minutes. Everything pointed to the same truth. They could threaten and warn, but they could not operate effectively without the support of key homeowners, including him. He didn't need to raise his voice or fight aggressively. The leverage was already his. Knowing that gave him confidence. The next morning, the air was thick with tension. A police car drove slowly past his house, then stopped at the end of the street. He stepped outside, smiled, and waved politely. The officer waved back, unsure of what to expect. The HOA had certainly painted a dramatic picture in their letter, but he had nothing to hide. In fact, he was ready to show that the lake was perfectly safe, that there was no real danger. His calm demeanor seemed to confuse the officer slightly, who had probably expected resistance or hostility, inside his home. He sipped coffee and watched as members of the HOA gathered at the neighborhood entrance. They were discussing their next steps, clearly frustrated that their letters had not had the desired effect. He allowed himself a quiet smile. They thought they were in control, but they didn't realize that he had already considered every possible outcome and was ready for them. The lake reflected the morning, sunlight like a mirror. It was serene, untouched, a small reminder that not everything in life could be controlled by rules or authority. He leaned on that feeling, drawing strength from the knowledge that his approach was measured, thoughtful, and strategic. In time, the HOA would learn that power is not always in the hands of those who shout the loudest, but in the hands of those who understand the true rules of influence. That first part of the conflict ended quietly, without confrontation. Letters continued to arrive, meetings were scheduled, and the occasional HOA member would walk by, glancing at the lake with a frown. But he remained calm, confident, and focused. The lake was his, not just by ownership, but by the quiet, clever advantage he held. The HOA might try to assert control. They might involve the police, but he knew that the foundation of his calm was unshakable. They had not yet realized that they were playing a game in which he already held the winning pieces. Evenings continued to be peaceful. He would sit by the lake, reflecting on the upcoming challenges and enjoying the moments of calm before the storm. Birds flew low across the water, frogs croaked in the distance, and the gentle wind ruffled the trees. From his perspective, the lake was a sanctuary, a place of quiet power and a reminder that patience, knowledge, and subtle strategy often trumped loud declarations of authority. As part one closes, the stage is set. The HOA has made its move, calling the police and sending warnings, believing they are in charge. Meanwhile, the homeowner remains calm, patient, and quietly powerful. He understands the real dynamics at play and prepares for what is coming, knowing that the next moves will determine the outcome of a conflict that is as much about control and influence as it is about a small, serene lake. The story has just begun, but even in this first part, it is clear that the homeowner is not someone to be underestimated. The lake is more than water. It is a symbol of his quiet strength and strategic thinking, and it will play a key role in the unfolding events. The morning after the letters had arrived from the HOA and the police, the homeowner woke up early. The sunlight streamed through his windows, reflecting on the lake outside and making it sparkle. To anyone looking from afar, everything seemed peaceful. But inside his mind, he was already thinking through the next steps. He knew the HOA believed they were in control. but he also knew how fragile their confidence really was. He made a simple breakfast, quietly listening to the birds outside. The house felt calm, but he was aware that today might be the day the HOA tried to escalate their actions. They had sent repeated warnings, and now with law enforcement copied into their letters, they were expecting a reaction. He sipped his coffee, feeling no anxiety, only focus. He had been in situations where organizations tried to intimidate people before, and he had learned a lot about staying calm and being prepared. After finishing his coffee, he stepped outside and walked around the lake. The water was perfectly still, except for small ripples from the wind. He noted how serene it looked. The HOA would probably argue that even this calm lake was a danger, but he knew it wasn't. Nothing about it posed a real risk. They were creating a problem where none existed, hoping to force compliance. He shook his head with a small smile. Their confidence was amusing to him. Around mid-morning, a car pulled up near the house. A local officer stepped out, looking slightly uncertain. He waved politely and invited the officer to walk around the property. The officer accepted, and together they strolled around the lake. He explained how it was maintained naturally, how the water was clear, and how it had been completely safe for years. The officer nodded and took notes, clearly not expecting this calm, cooperative response. The homeowner's approach was simple: show that there was nothing to hide, and the officer would see the truth for themselves. While the officer examined the property, the homeowner thought about the HOA. They were likely meeting elsewhere, discussing fines and enforcement. He knew them well enough to predict their actions. They were the type to escalate quickly, confident that authority was enough to force obedience. But they hadn't considered who really held the balance of power. Without his financial support and influence, many of the HOA's projects and operations would grind to a halt. This gave him an invisible advantage, one they didn't see coming. Back inside, he checked the HOA's past meeting notes and budgets. He noticed that a large portion of the funds relied on contributions from key properties, including his. If he withheld support, even temporarily, it could delay projects, freeze maintenance work, and cause the board members to scramble. He didn't intend to use this as a threat just yet. Instead, he treated it as quiet leverage. It's a secret strength that let him remain calm while they efflued. By noon, the officer had finished inspecting the property and thanked him for being cooperative. The homeowner smiled politely and suggested they keep in touch if any further questions arose. The officer left, shaking his head slightly at the unusual situation. Typically, complaints like these involved immediate tension or confrontation, but here everything had been smooth. The HOA had escalated unnecessarily, and the homeowner had managed it effortlessly. As soon as the officer's car disappeared, the homeowner sat down with his laptop and drafted a polite, professional email to the HOA. He addressed their concerns one by one, showing them the factual evidence that the lake was safe. He included water test reports, photos, and a summary of the maintenance schedule. The tone was calm, almost educational, designed not to provoke, but to present irrefutable facts. He knew that if the board members read it carefully, they would have no legitimate complaint. It was subtle, strategic, and effective. While sending the email, he reflected on human behavior. The HOA board members were so used to having power over others that they didn't stop to consider that the people they tried to control might have their own leverage. They assumed fear and pressure would work, but in reality, respect and reason often carried more weight. He had learned that patience, calmness, and preparation could diffuse even the most aggressive approaches. Later that afternoon, few HOA board members arrived at the property unannounced. They wanted to see the lake for themselves, to inspect and confirm whether there was a violation. He welcomed them politely, guiding them around the lake and explaining its natural state, the maintenance he performed, and the measures he had taken to ensure safety. Their expressions shifted from confidence to mild confusion. They expected confrontation, complaints, or excuses. Instead, they found clarity, calm, and evidence. One board member finally spoke, attempting to assert authority. "You need to take action immediately. This lake is not allowed to be like this according to our rules." The homeowner listened patiently, then responded calmly, showing them the bylaws, water safety reports, and the fact that the HOA's own rules allowed for exceptions under certain circumstances. He didn't argue. He demonstrated. Slowly, the board members began to realize that their assumptions had been flawed. Their confidence wavered. He allowed them to walk the property thoroughly, even pointing out areas where they might have concerns in the future. His transparency was deliberate. By being open, he reduced their anxiety while subtly highlighting his own control. They left with a mix of frustration and reluctant respect. They had come expecting to intimidate. They had left realizing that he was not easily intimidated. In the evening, he reflected on the day's events. The HOA had escalated, involved the police, and tried to pressure him, but nothing had worked. He had handled the situation calmly, methodically, and with evidence. He understood the psychological impact of their failed attempts. They believed they were in control, but the reality was different. Their power relied on fear and assumptions. His power relied on knowledge, preparation, patience. He spent some time by the lake watching the sunset and listening to the water ripple. The tranquility of the scene was a sharp contrast to the tension of the day. This contrast reminded him why he loved living here. It wasn't just the house or the neighborhood. It was the sense of peace he could create, even in the face of unnecessary conflict. The lake, serene and undisturbed, reflected not just the sky, but his quiet confidence. As the night deepened, he prepared for what might come next. The HOA would continue to plan, meeting behind closed doors and hoping for a mistake, but he was ready. He had observed them long enough to predict their behavior. Patience and strategy had turned the situation in his favor. The HOA's letters, complaints, and police involvement had not intimidated him. They had only given him more clarity about how to respond effectively. The day ended with a sense of quiet victory. While no one else may have noticed, the balance of power had shifted. The HOA, confident and loud in their assumptions, had underestimated him. He had handled the escalation without aggression, without threats, and without losing composure. He had let their own actions reveal their weaknesses, all while maintaining a calm, controlled presence. He went to bed that night feeling confident. Tomorrow, the HOA might try a new tactic, but he was ready. Knowledge, preparation, and patience were far more powerful than fear or loud authority. The lake remained peaceful, a symbol not just of beauty, but of the homeowner's quiet strength and strategic thinking. Part of the story was still unfolding, and he knew that as long as he stayed calm and observant, he would continue to navigate the challenges successfully. The next chapter of this conflict would reveal more, but he felt prepared, grounded, in control of his own world. The days after the HOA had inspected the lake passed quietly at first. The homeowner continued his routines, tending the garden, walking by the lake, and keeping his life peaceful. He knew the HOA was planning, probably discussing ways to pressure him further. They had realized that letters and police involvement had not worked, but he also knew they were stubborn. They would not give up easily, yet their confidence was now fragile. One afternoon, he received an email inviting him to attend a special HOA meeting. It was formal and demanded his presence to discuss the lake situation. Normally, he would not need to attend, but this was an opportunity. He could address them directly, show his calm authority, and, if done carefully, solidify the position he had been building silently. He accepted politely, noting the date and time. On the day of the meeting, he arrived early. The meeting room was filled with board members, some frowning, others whispering among themselves. He greeted everyone with a calm smile, shaking hands and maintaining a composed demeanor. They expected tension, maybe frustration, or defensiveness, but he remained measured. His calm presence set the tone immediately. It was subtle, but it was powerful. The meeting began with the HOA president speaking firmly. "We are here because of serious concerns regarding the lake on your property. We have letters, complaints, and even involvement from local authorities. This situation must be resolved." His tone was strong, meant to intimidate, but the homeowner simply nodded and listened. He knew that responding too quickly or emotionally would only give them more confidence. After the opening, he spoke. His voice was calm, deliberate, and polite. He went through each concern, addressing it with evidence, Reasoning and facts. Water safety reports, maintenance schedules, and photographs were presented clearly. Explained that the lake had been monitored for years, with no incidents, and that it did not violate any community rules. There was no need for fines or enforcement. He didn't argue with emotions. He presented clarity and logic. As he spoke, some board members shifted in their seats. They realized that their complaints were weak, based more on assumption than fact. The homeowner had prepared carefully. Every point they might raise had already been considered and answered. The room's energy changed subtly. The air of authority the board had carried in previous meetings began to fade. They were no longer fully confident that they could control the situation. One board member attempted a different approach, speaking more directly. You must take action because the neighborhood depends on compliance with rules. If we allow this, others will follow, and chaos may arise. The homeowner responded calmly. He acknowledged the importance of rules, but pointed out that rules existed to maintain order, not to punish or intimidate. He emphasized that the lake posed no real danger, and that compliance in this instance was not necessary. His tone was polite but firm, and it carried weight. It was clear he understood both the rules and the consequences of their enforcement. He then turned to a point the board had not considered. He subtly referenced the HOA's finances without threatening. I understand the HOA relies on contributions from key homeowners to maintain operations. I am happy to continue supporting the neighborhood, but I believe we must approach situations with reason and fairness. Decisions based on assumption or fear can have unintended consequences. His words were calm, but they carried a quiet power. The board members exchanged glances, realizing the hidden leverage in his words. Some members began to speak nervously, unsure of how to respond. They had thought authority and intimidation would be enough. No, they didn't anticipate a homeowner who combined preparation, logic, and subtle influence. His calm confidence shifted the room dynamic. The power they assumed was theirs had quietly moved. He did not need to be aggressive. He only needed to demonstrate clarity and understanding. The discussion continued with the homeowner guiding it carefully. He allowed board members to ask questions and expressed his willingness to cooperate in ways that made sense. He did not push them, but he subtly showed that their complaints were ineffective. The meeting lasted longer than expected, with the board members growing more aware of their own limitations. They were used to controlling situations, but this time, the homeowner controlled the pace, the information, and the tone. By the end of the meeting, the mood had shifted noticeably. The board members were no longer assertive, they were cautious. They realized that aggressive actions could backfire and that the homeowner had quietly established the upper hand. There were no loud declarations, no threats, only a clear demonstration of knowledge, preparation, and calm authority. The power dynamic had changed subtly but decisively. After the meeting, some board members lingered, speaking quietly among themselves. The homeowner walked calmly out of the room, smiling politely. Outside, he paused, taking a deep breath. He felt the satisfaction that comes from handling a challenge with strategy rather than force. The lake was still his, untouched by the unnecessary tension the HOA had tried to impose. Over the next few days, the HOA sent fewer letters and complaints. They had learned, or at least sensed, that further attempts to pressure him would be ineffective. The homeowner continued his routines, tending the property, walking by the lake, and enjoying the quiet moments that had always been his refuge. The lake reflected the sunlight beautifully, peaceful and undisturbed, a symbol of his calm and strategic approach. Neighbors noticed the calm returning to the neighborhood. The tension that had been building slowly dissipated, though no one fully understood the dynamics behind it. The homeowner observed quietly, understanding that the situation was delicate. The HOA's confidence had been shaken, but they were still present. He had not defeated them by confrontation, but by measured patience, preparation, and understanding of true influence. As Part 4 closes, the homeowner reflects on the events. He has navigated confrontation without aggression, using calm, authority, and evidence to shift the power balance. The HOA had assumed control through rules and fear, but he had quietly demonstrated that knowledge, preparation, and patience were more powerful. The lake remained peaceful, untouched, and symbolic of the homeowner's quiet strength. The story is nearing its conclusion. But the lessons of strategy, subtle influence, and calm resilience will remain central to the narrative as the final chapter unfolds. Days turned into weeks, and the tension that had once filled the neighborhood began to fade. The HOA had stopped sending threatening letters, and their meetings about the lake seemed to vanish from the agenda. It was as if the conflict had quietly resolved itself, but the homeowner knew that what had changed was not their interest in rules, but their understanding of the real balance of power. The lake remained as serene as ever, a mirror reflecting the sky, trees, and the patience he had maintained throughout the ordeal. He continued his daily routines, waking early to walk by the water, checking the garden, and tending to small projects around the house. These simple activities brought him joy, and they were now unshadowed by letters, fines, or unnecessary inspections. He reflected often on the events that had transpired, appreciating the lessons he had learned about strategy, patience, and influence. It wasn't confrontation that won the day, but calm, preparation, and knowledge. Neighbors started noticing subtle changes as well. Some commented on how quiet the neighborhood had become, how the tension that once seemed palpable had lifted. A few approached him casually, curious about the lake and the calm that seemed to radiate from his property. He smiled politely and explained in simple terms that the lake was maintained naturally, with care, and that there was no real danger. His tone was friendly and unassuming, but it carried the quiet authority of someone who had seen the situation through and come out steady and composed. As time passed, the HOA slowly returned to their usual routine, but with a noticeable difference. Their board members seemed more cautious, less quick to assume authority without facts, and more respectful of homeowners who could articulate their position with clarity. It was a subtle change, but the homeowner recognized it immediately. Their approach had shifted, not because of threats or confrontation, but because of reason, calm, and quiet influence. He had changed their expectations without ever raising his voice. One afternoon, received a brief email from the HOA president. The tone was formal but polite, acknowledging the measures he had taken to maintain the lake and stating that no further complaints would be filed. It was concise, almost as if the matter had never been contentious. He read the words carefully, smiling quietly. This small acknowledgement symbolized a larger truth. The HOA had recognized that their initial attempts at control were ineffective, and that the homeowner had established a clear, calm authority over his own property. He reflected on the journey, the letters, the police involvement, the meetings, and the inspection had all seemed overwhelming at first, but each step had been manageable with patience and preparation. By staying calm and using evidence and reason, he had avoided unnecessary conflict and created an environment where his perspective was respected. The HOA had assumed control through authority and intimidation, but real influence had rested with him all along. Evenings at the lake became a time for reflection and relaxation. He would sit by the water, watching the gentle movement of the ripples, listening to the subtle sounds of nature. The lake, which had once been a point of contention, was now a symbol of his steady approach. It reminded him of the power of calm, the value of knowledge, and the strength found in patience. The neighborhood, once tense, felt like a place of quiet balance once more. Neighbors occasionally stopped by, commenting on how well-maintained the property was, or asking questions about the lake. He answered politely, never boasting, but his calm demeanor and clear explanations left a strong impression. The lessons of the past weeks had changed him as well. He appreciated the importance of preparation, the impact of reasoned communication, and the subtle ways in which influence could shift without confrontation. It was a powerful lesson in quiet strength. Over time, the HOA's influence over the property diminished in practical terms. They continued to exist, but their capacity to intimidate or enforce unnecessary rules had been tempered. The homeowner had shown that authority was most effective when combined with reason, transparency, and calm communication. The lake, untouched and beautiful, reflected not only the sky, but the homeowner's ability to navigate challenges gracefully and effectively. The story concludes with a sense of resolution and peace. The HOA had retreated from unnecessary enforcement. The neighborhood returned to normal, and the homeowner had maintained control over his own life and property. The lake, serene and undisturbed, was a symbol of quiet victory and steady influence. Through patience, knowledge, and calm strategy, he had turned a potentially stressful situation into an opportunity for clarity, understanding, and subtle empowerment as he sat by the water one last time. The sunlight casting long shadows across the surface, he realized that the true victory was not in defeating the HOA, but in navigating the situation with confidence, calm, and integrity. The lessons learned would remain with him, and the lake would remain a peaceful reminder that patience and quiet strength often achieve more than confrontation or force ever could. The morning light reflected softly on the lake, creating a peaceful shimmer that made the homeowner pause for a moment and just breathe. After weeks of tension and subtle maneuvering, the neighborhood had settled into a calm rhythm. Yet he knew that maintaining peace was an ongoing effort. It wasn't just about avoiding conflict with the HOA. It was about keeping his life intentional, balanced, and grounded. He began the day with a walk around the property. Observing the subtle changes in the environment, the garden was thriving, small flowers peeking through the greenery, the trees swaying gently with the breeze. The lake, now a symbol of quiet victory, reflected not just the sky, but the sense of control and calm he had nurtured through careful patience and planning. Every step reminded him of the lessons he had learned about patience, preparation, and influence. Over coffee, he considered the interactions he had with the HOA and how they had unfolded. Initially, it had seemed overwhelming: letters, threats, and even police involvement. But through each step, he had stayed calm, prepared, and thoughtful. By responding with clarity and calm, he had not only protected the lake, but also taught a lesson in subtle power dynamics. Authority is not always about being loud or forceful. Often it is about knowledge, strategy, and restraint. That day, he decided to take a small walk around the neighborhood, greeting neighbors who waved or smiled. It was clear that people were curious about the lake and the recent tension with the HOA. But they also sensed the calm that had returned. He answered simple questions about his property and the lake, never bragging, only offering clear, concise, and honest explanations. His demeanor communicated confidence and kindness, the kind of presence that naturally earned respect without conflict. As he returned home, he reflected on human behavior. The HOA had assumed control because they were used to asserting rules and expecting compliance. Yet, they underestimated him. They had relied on fear, authority, and assumptions, while he had relied on understanding, preparation, and calm. The difference was subtle but profound. Their actions, initially intimidating, had become predictable and manageable once he recognized the true levers of influence. The afternoon passed with simple pleasures. He worked in the garden, tended to minor repairs around the house, and watched the sunlight shift across the water. The lake had become more than a body of water. It was a symbol of persistence, patience, and quiet authority. Every ripple reflected not just the sky, but the strength of remaining composed when others tried to provoke stress or conflict. In the early evening, he noticed a few HOA members walking by. They waved briefly, cautious but friendly. He smiled and waved back. It was a small gesture, but it represented the subtle shift in their approach. The tone of interaction had changed from confrontation to cautious respect. They no longer assumed they could push him into submission. Instead, they now observed, aware that real influence lay not in loud authority, but in thoughtful action. Later, he took time to sit by the lake, watching the ripples spread from small movements of water. He reflected on the long journey from tension to calm. The letters, meetings, and inspections had all seemed like challenges, but they were opportunities to demonstrate patience, preparation, and knowledge. By maintaining composure and responding thoughtfully, he had guided the situation toward resolution without raising his voice or forcing conflict. He realized that the experience had changed him, not in the sense of becoming more cautious, but in understanding the subtle dynamics of influence and human behavior. It was a lesson in observation, strategy, and the importance of staying calm when others try to impose stress. The lake, serene and reflective, had been both a literal and symbolic center for these lessons. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the water, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The neighborhood was peaceful, the HOA had tempered its approach, and the lake remained as beautiful and serene as ever. He understood that real strength did not come from confrontation but from preparation, calm, and clarity. The challenges he had faced were reminders of the value of patience and subtle influence, and of how quiet confidence could shape outcomes more effectively than force or intimidation. That night, he sat by the window, looking out at the water under the stars. The lake reflected the twinkling lights, peaceful and undisturbed, a quiet testament to the careful and thoughtful approach he had maintained. Every ripple seemed to echo the lessons of the past weeks, the importance of patience, the power of preparation, and the quiet authority of calm and reason. The neighborhood continued its rhythms, with life carrying on as usual, but he knew the subtle dynamics had shifted. The HOA, once assertive and unyielding, had learned to approach matters with more caution and respect. Neighbors recognized, if only quietly, that influence and calm often carried more weight than loud authority. The lake remained a place of tranquility and reflection, a reminder that careful thought and patience could transform even the most stressful situations. As Part 6 concludes, he remained committed to his way of life, grounded, calm, and attentive. The lake was more than a property feature. It was a symbol of resilience, wisdom, and quiet strength. Through patience, clarity, and thoughtful action, he had not only maintained control over his own space, but it also guided the community to a more balanced understanding of respect and authority. The lessons of the experience would remain with him, shaping not just his approach to conflict, but his approach to life itself.